What is a visual artist? And that's the question everybody wants to know the answer.
Is a person who is expressing themselves by providing, generating or manipulating visual stimulation.
Es una persona que sobre todo sabe mirar el mundo.
It could cover artists, it could cover filmmakers. It's a broad term.
Why am I a visual artist?
Actually, many different things and ways to be a visual artist today.
Artistas que trabajan con la instalación, que trabajan con una forma muy espacial de trabajar con el vídeo, una forma incluso podemos decir a veces hasta arquitectónica.
Maybe I'm a visualist. Maybe I'm a fucking guy who likes to make shit.
To be a visual artist is to work with visuals, simply.
My favorite thing is to sit here, put on the tunes, and make shit.
Hi, my name is Meryl Aldegheri. I'm the first video jockey in the world. The first time I did multimedia live performance, I wasn't using video, I was using film and film projectors. And I was projecting things, I had live actors, I had all kinds of, I had learned about the happenings. So I was really into this whole thing of experimenting and making live events where I played with the audience. And that's what I carried on to my style of VJing. I played with the audience. I didn't just project things. I pulled people off the dance floor. I gave them the camera. I fooled around with them. We experimented. The term was not in use because we had to make it up. And the people who started MTV came to that club when I was working and asked me to explain to them what I was and what did I call myself. And then he said, I know there's no video discs, it's video jockey.
When I moved to Bristol in England almost 10 years ago, I was doing VJing as a hobby. So every weekend I would take my laptop and my projector and I would go in a club and like spend an hour putting cables and hanging projectors and everything, and I would improvise and do VJing. I would always follow the musician or the DJ, and I would play for 1, 2, 3 hours, sometimes the whole night, and I was sort of following the main music. We used the name anti-VJ as a sort of response. It was a joke, half a joke, but half a statement. Like we're VJs, but we really hate the simple classic effect. I could see my audience, but while using the MIDI controllers and changing the visuals, I could actually see how they react. So every weekend we would go in clubs and like push MIDI controllers and with Resolume and Archaos, and so basically we were doing VJing. So when we started NTVJ, I guess in 2005, I started using the name as my VJ name. And then in the following years, I met with Yannick Jacquet, Legoman, with Romain Tardy and Olivier Razzi, and we were all VJs.
Para mí va de la mano esto con el despertar de la escena club.
VJing, I define as the art of making pictures dance.
A DJ is a musician who plays records in a club. And a VJ is a visual artist who plays visuals in a club.
Para mí amueblar es la palabra. Un local sin la oscuridad necesaria, sin la oscuridad necesaria habitual que hay en las discotecas. Un local, enciendes toda la luz. En un local le quitas la parte visual, le quitas pantallas, le quitas cualquier tipo de parte visual. Le quitas el sonido, se queda desnudo, se queda vacío. Es como si una habitación no tuviera muebles. Cuando le pones música apagas luces, juegas con contrastes y le pones imagen, parece otra cosa, está vestida, es como poner ropa. Por eso yo siempre utilizo el concepto de amueblar. Es ocupar espacio, no ocupar espacio. Cosas no tangibles pueden ocupar espacio.
I think electronic and club music is really connected to the whole visual movement because, you know, first video mappings come from VJ scene, and the guys just took their junk outside and decided to do something not just indoors. And also, I mean, it's audiovisual.
So the very first VJ set I saw, I guess, was Cold Cut with Ecstatic in 1998. There was this track, Timber, that was probably the most classic VJ audiovisual track from Cold Cut.
I'm Matt Black from Cold Cut, Ninja Tune. So Cold Cut started in 1987. It's me and Jonathan Moore, and we were both DJs on the London warehouse scene, interested in hip-hop, interested in taking old records, taking bits from them and putting them together to create something new, using initially turntables and a mixer, and then later on digital samplers, sequencers and other musical toys. Still, many people come up to me that I meet around the world and say that Timber was the piece which was their audiovisual epiphany.
Maybe she go, maybe no, she never saw. Take it, and she take it, where coconut, she played about.
I also remember the guys from Berlin, Pfeiffer. They were the first to release a DVD with VJing. They were actually, I think, working with B-pitch control. And yeah, that was the first time I saw a DVD focused on sort of VJing and graphics.
Pfeiffer is a Berlin-based studio.
We were founded in 1998. In German, Pfadfinder means Boy Scouts. It's different kind of terms, but in the basic idea, it was like one of the first doing like visuals in those days.
I think it's really hard to define a VJ actually, because most people confuse it in a way. If you think of like the first VJs was like the people for MTV that chose the music clips basically, and it turned out a little bit different.
We're Pfadfinderei. It's like behind the whole thing. I'm the one who was doing the, like on the live shows, the live performance for Moderat, for example, for the last 2 albums. More people working on this and like working for the content, working for the concepts. It's not only me. The Moderat show wouldn't be the same without the whole visual aspect. Of course not, because it's like it's part of the deal. It's like part of the game, and the project is like from the beginning totally grown together with us, like the mode selector guys, Apparat and Pfadfinder together. So it's a totally like AV show. The whole audiovisual performances and the whole visual aspect for music shows these days got more like, it's getting more and more important, but it started already 15 years ago when everybody started to use just laptops for doing performances, because it got kind of boring for people to watch it. Because looking like when we all started, it was like when the first laptops came out, and you saw always like dudes, mostly dudes, also women, on stage behind their laptops, and you didn't know what they're doing.
The audiovisual industry started maybe 10 years ago with the collapse of the musical industry. So the musical industry collapsed, and musicians they needed something more to stand from the crowd. So they needed an audiovisual show so that everybody would cater to their concert and it would be more interesting for them.
Los visuales en la electrónica mainstream yo no creo que sea una nueva manera de renovarse. Yo lo que creo es que la electrónica se ha popularizado tanto, ha llegado a ser tan mainstream, tanto que necesita de espectáculos.
If you read tickets right now, if you read tickets right now, if you read tickets right now, if you read tickets right now.
Everybody tends to forget when there is something new coming, when the electronic music is coming, and when some other field is coming. So history starts again, all over again.
All these strands, if you like, have a relationship to AV art. And it's very illuminating to look at the history and be inspired by what some of the pioneers have done before us.
Los hermanos Lumière,
Andy Warhol,
Oscar Fischinger,
Norman McLaren,
Maya Deren,
Yoko Ono,
Namjoon Paik, Bill Viola,
Athanasius Kircher,
Len Lai,
Valdelomar,
John Cage,
Kandinsky.
People experimenting with sort of visual music.
Leonardo da Vinci in the Renaissance produced amazing sound and light shows.
Artistas que trabajan happening en los 60.
70s audio-visual shows that had loads and loads and loads of projectors.
People, performance, art.
We're using techniques and tricks that were invented more than a century ago.
Juguetes ópticos.
The magic lantern.
Dioramas, de panoramas.
Or the Zoetrope, which was kind of like first predecessor to animation.
The color organ.
Shadow puppetry in China and stuff.
Experimentos psicodélicos en los años 60 y 70.
Liquid light shows.
Disney's Fantasia.
Para mí es muy fácil trazar como una línea desde los inicios del cine a los inicios de la creatividad digital.
I can imagine at a campfire and you have a wall, you can already do shadow plays.
Y a partir de que el hombre puede adquirir la capacidad de reproducir fuego, no por medios naturales o de mantenerlo, es cuando empieza la expresión de la luz y del arte.
Terms like visualist, VJ, video artist, to me, they kind of all overlap. Actually, I've been thinking about a term to describe this art form, and to me, the term is AV, audiovisual art.
I know that many visual artists who are now putting pieces into museums started as VJs, because when they started as VJs, they had the opportunity to experiment, improvise, and maybe had more freedom or less pressure than putting some piece in a museum.
For me, one of the highlights of what I did with Richie Hawtin was the Guggenheim New York performance we made together, which was what we called The Object, Plastic Man, which was for me a very special occasion because as an architect, this building is one of the inspirations in the world. Both the way it is designed and also the conceptually how Frank Lloyd Wright proposed this building to artists.
Ali and Richie went to the museum, saw space, and they came up with this idea, like man versus machine. Like we actually call it like monolith, like object. So we wanted to build this LED tower inside of Guggenheim Museum. We had some like front of house mission control, including Richie. It's not just normal stage, DJ, audience.
How do we do something that people haven't seen before? And that's hard. You know, now I feel like it's a mixed reality thing. I think it's a machine learning thing. You know, I think it's something, maybe it's, I don't know, we're figuring it out. is to create something that moves people to the point where they don't know what they're seeing. It's kind of like David Blaine. You know, like David Blaine does a magic trick and people are just like, holy shit, what the fuck is happening? Everybody's seen everything. Everything's so polished. You know, you go see Avengers Infinity War, whatever it's called, and it's like, how many times have we seen the city blow up? How many times have we seen like robots smashing a skyscraper and 5 billion particles fall off the thing? You know, like we've seen it. You know, like no CG is ever going to impress us anymore. Like we've seen it.
Hollywood is a very powerful kind of, you know, storytelling machine, you know, and I think these days, today, we have, you know, we're a very privileged generation to have access to technology and to be able to express ourselves and to speak and to tell stories. So for me, the major difference between, say, VJing and live cinema is the kind of incorporation of making both the visual element and the audio. A lot of VJing is done in a club environment. It's a background to what is essentially a social interaction between people that go out to have fun. But live cinema is more bringing the kind of, you know, the more of an experimental approach to filmmaking and live music together in a kind of in a live event. When we started to make our own music and we started to work directly with sound and introduced narrative and to start to kind of bring elements that we had explored through VJing into a kind of theatrical space. It doesn't have to necessarily be narrative, it can be non-narrative, it can be abstract. It can be generative and coded, or it can be filmmaking, architecture, 3D, people working with virtual reality and sort of placing that in a kind of live situation. Kind of convergence of lots of different disciplines and different backgrounds. What unites all of those things is an interest in storytelling. The process of making electronic music and editing and making film is very much the same, you know. So there's a lot of people now who aren't just musicians, they're also video directors and they have visual ideas and they create the two things together. The term live cinema is just one term. I'm not fixated on terms. I think people spend too much time kind of trying to put a label on something. I think it's about doing it and experiencing it and the process of making it and sharing it and the reaction that you get from the audience. I'd say Herman Colgan, who's an artist from Canada. His shows are very beautiful. I think it depends. It's like there's so many different genres of music and sort of visual art that come together in this area.
I think live cinema, in the past, we use this term a lot to describe the artists that use images and sound at the same time. And in the past, because the technology, it was true that a lot of the artists use the images like on the rectangular screen with a projector, and the audience was sit in the theater. The live cinema, the new thing when it's happened, we have always the control on the content. So we can change, depend of the audience, the venue, the sound, the images, the sound, the order, everything. This is a resume of the live cinema. I think now some artists continue to work in this form. So live cinema still exists, but now I think because the technology is more powerful, we can do further than this. We are very far from the cinema now. The beautiful thing inside this is each artist develop and use and think about new way to take advantage of the technology to communicate with the audience and be more and more far from the cinema. Now I work a lot about the frequency. Isotope, I worked more or less 2 years and a little bit more than that with two scientific from France, from a particle accelerator. So they invite me first to visit this scientific center, and after that maybe develop a piece that use this technology. So I have the opportunity to understand and have access to all the information, and I use this to create this new performance. So this new performance, it's about the energy transfer. So everything is about create a dispositive on the stage that is 6 meters long, that the energy pass from the back of the stage to the front of the stage. So it's a large light plate on the back. I excite this plate with electricity, and when the plate have too much electricity, they have a lens that analyze this energy and pass the energy to a high of light that transfer the energy from the back to the front, the big motor and turbina on the front of the stage. So the relation between the sound and the images is very in evolution. Everything is frequency. The wood is frequency. My cloth is frequency. So the light, the thing, the object, the music, everything is frequency. The earth is frequency. If you change the frequency of the earth, it will crack. Maybe it will explode.
An audiovisual performance to me is something that has the combination of the two elements of music and picture goes to make something that's bigger than just the music on its own or just the picture on its own.
It's a craftful marriage of talent, audio, visual, and technology supporting the creativity to come up to a audiovisual orgasm.
It's not only make music with visual like in the cinema or something like that, it's making new propositions in this new field. Personally, I try to propose something very coherent in this specific field.
For me, audiovisual performances is when the visuals and the music or the sound have really been worked on together at the same time, and when there's a concept perhaps leading both aspects. So in that sense, many festivals will just like present music and then add on visuals, but it's a bit interchangeable. And in that sense, that for me is not really an audiovisual practice. My performance, Soft Revolvers, uses 4 big acrylic discs, and each one has sensors and Wi-Fi chip inside. So at any moment of the performance, I can access the speed of rotation of the tops. And I can also use the gyroscope on different axes to get a bit of the wobbling. And so with that data, I generate some music processes that I interact with live. Like people can see that I'm using one instrument or the other, which I think is kind of interesting compared to a laptop performance, or even like if you're using modular synths live, is because like there's a clear distinction on the different elements that I can play with. It's very difficult, I think, to represent that visually with electronic music in general. So in that sense, having many different objects that have their own independent behavior helps me to represent that idea visually. And I think like just the fact that the object is not something that most people have seen before, like sure it references spinning tops, but it's also a bit otherworldly, like you don't really know what it is. And I think people are really curious to see them close. So usually when I finish a performance, like I either let people come, like I either say, please, like you can come and see it, or sometimes people will just jump on the stage to see the objects, and then I let them play just so that they understand a bit what I've been working on or working with during the performance. Yeah.
I think I see me like a kind of octopus, so with a lot of different or too many, I don't know, possibilities. I think for all the people, normal people, silent don't exist. The real silence don't exist. It just exists if you go to the camera anechoica. So if you go to this camera, this room, it will be the same thing after 2-3 minutes. Your brain will balance and your art will be very loud. So it's impossible to be in the completely silent. If you don't have ear, the sound don't exist.
My aesthetics is a result of a dialogue with the technology. What I mean with this is that the technology has limitations and the technology has specific properties, and as an artist I try to figure out what I can do with this. The beauty of my work, in my opinion, is that it surprises people. People have seen cinema, people have seen a lot of audiovisual art, but most people have never seen a laser show like that. For Lumiere, for instance, I can only use 4 lasers. With 4 lasers, I have a certain restriction of what I can achieve. If I could use 400 lasers, I could imagine completely different pieces, completely different ways of expression. But in order to use 400 lasers, they need to become much smaller and much, much cheaper. The progress of technology changes the access to technology, and the access allows a different way of experimentation.
Para mí una instalación es un espacio imaginario que lo conviertes en un espacio real. Un espacio donde puedes tener una experiencia artística inmersiva, ¿no? A diferencia de un cuadro en la que tú contemplas el cuadro desde fuera, una instalación tú formas parte de esa pintura.
El espectador se transforma en un habitante de nuestra pieza y nuestra pieza igual no tiene sentido si no hay habitantes. Un requerimiento de un espacio es que sea habitado, digamos, o que sea disfrutado o vivido por alguien, y en ese caso ese alguien es el público. Nos gusta llegar a la gente, casi diría a un nivel básicamente perceptivo y emocional.
Nuestra relación con el espacio es súper estrecha. La mayoría de instalaciones que nosotros hacemos son site-specific, es decir, pensamos y ideamos instalaciones que se acoplan al espacio, que aumentan el espacio. Entonces, nosotros nos gusta mucho trabajar con arquitecturas singulares porque en realidad nos está dando el 50% de la pieza. La pieza no va a ser igual si hacemos una instalación en una arquitectura de Mies van der Rohe que si lo hacemos en una arquitectura de Gaudí. Las características acústicas de un espacio también te llevan a trabajar de una cierta forma. Reforzar la reverberación, reforzar los delays, los ecos, etc. El proceso creativo y el resultado de la obra tiene mucho que ver con la arquitectura.
En cada pieza buscamos matices diferentes, comunicarnos con el público o hacerle reaccionar a distintos estímulos, que su reacción sea diferente, depende de la pieza o del concepto que lleva la pieza. Trabajas con el color, ¿no? Y los colores cálidos te llevan a un sitio emocionalmente y los colores fríos te llevan a otro sitio emocionalmente. Yo creo que son lenguajes muy similares, la música y la luz.
So light can have, make you feel different things, different lights and different colors can make you feel different things, and the way they're combined with music.
La oscuridad crea anonimato, las luces y si no el estrobo es el ejemplo máximo, crean confusión, crean esta pérdida de realidad. Esto yo creo, esto y una música, un volumen muy alto que también contribuyen, todo esto es lo que hace que el público esté viviendo una realidad que es totalmente diferente a su realidad diaria.
Visuals or the space, the design of the space, lights, smoke, everything that surrounds what you hear is part of the experience. One of the design elements for my visuals were darkness. There was a section in this performance which was 6 hours in total, like half an hour or almost sometimes 1 hour depending on the event. I was displaying nothing on the screen, and that was a very important part of the show actually. Sometimes when you have nothing to see on the screen, it is the place for your imagination.
So I guess the main common point in all my works is the way I use light. I always try to use a light source. It could be a projector, it could be LEDs, it could be a candle, anything, but I always try to manipulate the light. For me, light is the way we perceive reality. Everything we see around us, we see it through light. If there's no light, there's nothing, there's no reality. Of course, we can hear the sound and we have the other inputs, the other senses, but in my opinion, vision is the main sense for me. So light is just the way it defines the reality for me. While I manipulate the light, when I send a pixel onto something with projection mapping, then I feel I can manipulate reality. Because if reality is light, then by controlling the projection and the light, you can almost manipulate reality. So you can change the architecture, you can create windows where there's nothing, you can open the walls, you can make something disappear or reappear, you can almost like, manipulate reality and completely change how people see the world around them.
Light creates life, light creates warmth, light creates art. In the sense of, everything. And if I talk about our line of work, light is really important to create our work. So Living Room was created while we were still students in our graduation project. We were in our final year and we really wanted to use projection mapping as a graduation project, and we wanted to use Mr. Beam as a graduation project. A well-executed mapping is like a good magic trick. So the audience knows that it's not real, but it wants to believe it's real.
Where does it all come from? Where does it come from? Where does it come from? Where does the video mapping come from? And I have a specific view about that. The video mapping comes from the cavemen. The very first cavemen, in the caves, you know, Neolithic guys. And they were in this cave and they see a rock. And the rock reminds them of a horse. So they take some ground dirt, turn it into some kind of very rustic painting and convert the rock into a horse. They had this idea of a shape, a natural shape, and for us today a natural shape can be architecture.
There is a definition of actually combining craftfully animation and the object that you're animating on. So if you want to put it in how we used to explain it is actually to create a visual skin that you put on the object and recreate the object by putting an animation layer on top of it.
I think a mapping, I mean, it's a technical term also. I think it's just a projection on a sort of uneven surface that would translate for me as a mapping.
It's very difficult to say who was the inventor of projection mapping, because a long time ago, people using just light on castle to light up architecture, they're just doing masking by focusing the light really precisely, but that's sort of close to projection mapping.
I will take the example of a French architect called Hans Walter Müller, who was for me one of the guys who made the first video mapping test, 1960 perhaps. He made some works with diapositive, so he used diapo to redraw space onto the space. So for me it was a very first test of mapping projection, at least with a super old technology.
I remember the work of Pablo Valbuena. In December 2006, he did a really beautiful projection mapping on really simple cubes, really simple sculpture, and I found it beautiful and inspiring. And the same months, I did something within the same field, really minimal, really simple. So I saw it was the beginning of projection mapping.
It was beautiful. It was this very simple kind of sculptural piece in a gallery that was being gradually illuminated with projection.
I think you have other people who are more strict. Also, something I heard from going to mapping festivals that they were like, it's not really a mapping because it doesn't really use the building. For me, as soon as you're projecting onto an uneven surface, you get this kind of yeah. For me, you can define it as a mapping.
Even in like food and restaurant, you see projection mapping coming in.
You have a combination of the animation, the sound, the food, the smell. You know how they do the service. It's like a full show, and that for me is next level. So, I mean, what I really like in Anton's paintings, as you can see here behind me, is also this one. It's very straightforward. Also, it's not in art. You have a lot of pretension also, or like a lot of air. You know, people blow up their stuff. But this is really what you see is what you get almost.
In gallery invasion,
Well, we decided to do something with the paintings that I made. And one of the things that it's an amazing idea to have a gallery with paintings and the paintings come alive. And that was the reason that we did something with dynamic projection in this small gallery. Normally we have to use lots of projectors to cover the whole gallery, but in this case with Moderat we only use one projector.
Creo que vivimos ahora mismo en una realidad algorítmica, un mundo en el que la programación y los datos están afectando nuestro día a día. Y en ese sentido me interesa mucho constatar o hacer obras de arte que puedan ayudar al público a entender esa nueva realidad algorítmica que es un poco abstracta en realidad. No acabamos de ver la programación, el código que ahora mismo puede estar funcionando grabando esta cámara. Hay muchos conceptos que son, yo creo que importantes para mí. Uno de ellos, yo creo que es intentar materializar lo invisible. Intentar crear una constatación visual que permita entender un poco más el mundo en el que viven. Quise hacer un homenaje a un soporte al que tengo mucho cariño, que es el DVD. Conseguí 2.400 películas en formato DVD. De cada película seleccioné fragmentos, que es lo que luego he proyectado sobre los 2.400 DVDs. La obra Sica Ingentium para mí es quizás una de las obras más importantes que he hecho en mi vida. Es un proyecto que tardé 3 años en hacer. Es uno de los proyectos de videomapeado, yo creo que más complejos que jamás se han hecho. Estoy especialmente orgulloso de la arquitectura tecnológica. Yo creo que hace falta una labor de intentar crear obras de arte que nos permitan mejor entender esta nueva realidad.
Now we have LED lights or fluorescent lights, whatever. What about projection? What about using mirrors and bending the lights? What about putting lights on robots? What about using lasers? What about bouncing lasers off of streak filters? And what about creating infinite tunnels of light? Then it just kept on going and going and going, where you start to get machines involved. You know, you start to get aberrations involved where you start to fuck with the light. You start to bend the light and refract the light and filter the light through the lens with filters, you know, putting crazy stuff on the camera, you know, because to take in light to the sensor, you can also fuck with the camera. Camera can interpret light in a lot of ways. That's why I do a lot of infrared photography, because it's seeing a whole spectrum of light that you actually can't see with your human eye. When I arrived at Pantaleón, they said, we need someone to direct this film. We need someone to take this film and design it and give it an edit and give it music, give it a presence, give it a story, give it everything. And that was the first job I did with them. The cool thing about Box was that there's a third robot. There's a third robot on a track, a smaller robot that's holding the camera. And so not only do you have a projector tracking the 2 canvases, you have the camera tracking everything. So you can actually see into the canvas. And so we render from this camera's perspective. So when you see Box in person and you're over here, it's flat. You know, it's flat. There's nothing there. It's like it doesn't work. But only when you look through this camera does it actually work, and you actually see into the box, and it's great. With every project, you learn something, right? With Box, we had the luxury of time and facility, you know, because it was all just in the studio. It was like a robotics studio that had everything there. So every day, we would go into this giant warehouse and have everything we needed. So we shot it, like I said, we shot it 5 times. We shot it like 30 times, and just testing. When you're outside of that, you know, you don't have that luxury because everything costs money. To get the studio space, to get the robots, to get the fucking projectors, everything costs money. So now it's kind of like I'm trying to perfect it.
sometimes you can see some shows with everything, you know, so everything is nothing for me. I prefer to have only one thing, one good idea. So I guess that things will be more simple, efficient, and radical.
Our name is 1024 architecture. Architecture is the physical, is the real world. And 1024 used to be your screen resolution back in the days. And the concept behind 1024 architecture is the mix between the physical world and the digital world. Today I like nothing. I hate all the audiovisual shows because I'm a super egocentric guy and behind me all the world is shit. A lot of my friends are doing really crazy shows and I always like to see what they do and how they behave with an audiovisual show and how they respond to it. So that's why I like what is doing Joanny Le Mercier, for example. I like what are doing the Nonotax, for example. I like what is doing Daito Manabe, for example.
I'm artist and programmer and DJ and composer. 全てにおいて、プログラミングを使っているっていうのと、あと僕のバックグラウンドがマテマティクスなので、そういうことが全ての作品に影響している気がします。僕が最初にプログラミング、コーディングを始めて面白かったのは自分が自分の能力を超えたことを、できるようになったり、自分が想像してないことができるようになるっていうところにやっぱ素晴らしさがあって。コードっていうのは自分でツールを作り出すことができるので、だからそこがやっぱり一番違うところかなっていう気がしますね。ただやっぱコードそのものは、数学とかと一緒で、かなり抽象的なものなので、それ自体がアウトプットを持たないと、そういう作品とか、人に伝わるものにはなかなかなっていかないかなっていう。
Pues un código sería un fragmento de texto que está codificado de una manera que una máquina, un microcontrolador o un ordenador pueda entender. Y un poco el traductor de ese lenguaje sería la figura del programador.
It's basically text instructions telling the computer what to do, and the computer is, on the one hand, it does what you tell it to do. On the other hand, it's quite simple. Like it does very basic things, but it can do lots of them or very quickly.
Usualmente los programadores creativos nos movemos en un mundo en el que la comunidad es muy importante por el uso del software libre y herramientas de código compartido, donde entonces la comunidad se basa mucho en el compartir conocimiento, código, herramientas, y entonces así todo el mundo puede crecer de una manera distribuida.
All these people from around the world that are making stuff and sharing stuff and creating, and like I think that's quite beautiful. Like these tools actually just attract all kinds of people and everybody's work gets better.
Yo aprendí lo que es el código creativo en una agencia de publicidad cuando vine aquí a vivir a Barcelona, donde sí que utilizábamos códigos que puede ser para crear campañas publicitarias, Y entonces sí que se empezó a tomar en cuenta que el código tenía muchas más salidas que no hacer lo estándar o lo estipulado. Al crear piezas artísticas, lo que sí que tenemos a lo mejor es una libertad mayor a la hora de expresar y de crear un contenido más sensible, donde las emociones y donde la pieza en sí no está limitada por un concepto más funcional. Yo creo que es el arte de la luz y de cómo trabajamos la luz y los colores.
Cuando trabajamos en Light Paint, en Silhouettes, por ejemplo, todas esas máquinas se relacionaban, ¿no? Desde la motion control, al disparador de la cámara, a la luz que se proyectaba de fondo, al LED cuando se encendía, todo eso estaba relacionado, ¿no? Y la forma en cómo lo relacionábamos, por ejemplo, era a través de código, a través de software y programación de software, y también lo que hacíamos era traducir las animaciones en 3D aplicando un plugin programado por nosotros que transformaba eso en coordenadas. Entonces, nuestra forma de utilizar el código es casi como una especie de camino.
So I think a lot of times the work that I make is, on the one hand, building something, but also just changing and manipulating and adjusting. And the artwork is actually in those tiny changes and seeing how those tiny changes have really big impact on the result.
で今も新しいニューアイディアでドローンとレーザーとライブパフォーマンスで使おうと思った人っていうのは、すごく少なくて、多分でも一番最初にステージで使ったのはメモアクテン。僕はそのドローンと、ダンサー、ドローン、ダンス、あとその AR テクノロジー。
Everybody has access to the technology, so everyone could say that they're a filmmaker or they're a director or photographer, but at the end of the day, it's I think the person that really knows the craft, knows the art, and knows how to push it further that really takes advantage of that technology.
It is a real possibility that you get too involved with the gadgets and what they can do, that you actually forget what you're trying to say or what's the philosophy behind what you're doing. So you can have easily blingy things that are impressive, but actually the only thing that lingers is the wow thing. You have to be really thoughtful when crafting your art piece in what is the message.
De 彼も僕がやった仕事に興味を持ってくれてて、で何かできたらいいねっていう話をしてくれてすごい嬉しかったのを覚えてるんですけど、でそこから何度かやり取りしたけど、やっぱ彼らが作り出そうとしているものっていうのはちょっとやそっとではできるようなことではないので、なかなかいいチャンスがなかったんだけど。It's obsession. It's obsession. It's obsession. It's obsession. It's obsession. シックスっていう会社のジン君っていうクリエイティブディレクターから、声をかけてもらって、新しいミュージックビデオの話があるので、それ広告のプロジェクトでちょっ と紙を使ってペーパーマッピングをやりたいみたいな話から始まったんですけど。彼らのなんかもうそういうスタンスにしびれましたね。で僕はあんなすごいプロジェクトは人生に何回も多分できないと思うので彼らと一緒に仕事ができてすごい嬉しかったし今でも励みになってますね。
Exploring, playing with these things, manipulating them, pushing them, trying to figure out where the boundaries are, and actually, really thinking critically about what does it mean? What do these things mean? What do they imply? And how can we use them for non-commercial, weird things? Tempt is an old school graffiti artist. He is based in LA, and he's over a decade ago he fell over and he was diagnosed with a disease called ALS. We went out to LA. We were invited by this family that knew him and invited us out to LA, and we just got to know him, got to know his family, his caregivers, and we just started hacking on trying to come up with a low-cost system for eye tracking. And he had a commercial system, a very expensive system. We started hacking that, and we started to do all these things where we were building tools for him to draw graffiti again. And then taking the data, like he would draw graffiti in the hospital room, and we would send the drawing over the internet out on the street, and then we would project his drawings live, project it on a building. This project to me is like a superhero story. Right? What has happened when you're a superhero? Like always with the superhero, it's like some accident, right? Something like they spill something in the lab and they have like a terrible accident, but then they come back with a new power.
Toda profesión tiene un tempo. Tiene que aparecer, tiene que desarrollarse y llega un momento, que esto es un poco la teoría de la cascada, ¿no? Que desde que empieza la profesión hasta que da que hablar, es decir, hasta que la masa, que el público la da por establecida, ahí siempre hay muchos años. Esto se ve en todas las profesiones. Se ha visto, por ejemplo, con los disc jockeys, se ha visto con los light jockeys, tal vez lo último es el video jockey.
I'm sure that we as a scene will take this forward, we will become stronger, we will do more amazing work, and we will establish this as a major new modern art form.
Estamos reciclando muchas de las ideas del pasado y dándolas una nueva actualidad tecnológica.
I recycle ideas from everybody, why shouldn't they? I think that's the beautiful side. It's like nature. Something dies, it decomposes into the soil then gives nutrients to a new growth. The growth grows, drops seeds, it's just like a beautiful cycle, and I think creativity is the same way.
We will probably have a screenless projection, maybe on invisible films or with like plasma, sort of plasma holograms, which don't really exist yet, but we'll surely have volumetric displays, either real volumetric or head-mounted displays like the ones that are coming now.
I don't want to be prophet, but I strongly believe that we are at the beginning of something beautiful, and it's the beginning of the journey. At least I feel it like internally that, this is like something that is appearing here and there, and it's going to get traction, and it's going to probably go in many directions, in the wrong ones, in the commercial ones, but there is going to be a new thread of, or there is a new thread of artistic movement happening.
やっぱそういうものがたくさん出てきて、人間にとってね、最終的に本当にいいものかどうかっていうのは、それこそ30、40年経たないと分かんないこととは思いますけど、そうですね、僕も